Can you just state your name, rank, and assignment?
We just need you to introduce yourself.
I'm James Ballou. I was retired from the Navy as a commander, and I spent time on various ships, mostly on carriers, but I was on ships like amphibious ships and the salvage ship.
Okay. Why did you join the service, or were you drafted?
No, I joined it because I wanted to join the service since I was 5 years old, and whether it had been a war or not, I was still going to join the Navy.
How old were you when you joined?
18.
18? What were you doing before you joined the service?
Just whatever, 17, 18 years. You know, construction work, you know, I worked in a meat packing plant, and things like that.
Did you originally enlist in the Navy, or did you?
No, I enlisted as a Navy, as
okay.
a raw recruit.
And then they sent you through officer candidate school and everything?
Not really. I eventually made chief, and then while I was chief, they made a bunch of warrant officers, and then I was a warrant officer for a few years, and then I went to what they call an LDO, which is limited duty officer, and I got accepted for that, and then I went from ensign on up to commander as an LDO.
So when you were joining, how did your parents feel about you joining the service?
Well, I wanted to join when I was 17, but my father wouldn't let me because he had to sign.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was 18, he didn't have to sign, so I went down to the recruiting office and joined.
So your parents were a little skeptical?
No, they knew what I was going to do. They didn't want, the war started, so they didn't want me in the Army, and I sure didn't want to get in the Army either.
Mm-hmm.
Be slogging around in that mud, so I ran down there and joined the Navy because I'd got a draft notice, which in those days they were sending, you know, that's just after World War II started.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, well, they'll be wanting me to come down there and register. Everyone had to register.
Right.
So when I got down there, when I got that notice, I said, it's time, and I ran down to that Navy recruiting office and just made it by a few days. Because if you went down to the draft board, what they would do then, so many went in the Army, so many went in the Navy, so many went in the Marines. There was no Air Force at the time. It was the Army Air Force. So that's why I got in the Navy.
So where did you do your basic training?
I did my basic training in Farragut, Idaho in the middle of winter, and it was cold and snow on the ground a couple of feet, like the froze up there.
So when you got there, was there culture shock on your part from meeting people all over the country?
Well, I was in what training is at, it's called boot camp in the Navy,
mm-hmm.
and I think in the Marines too, but it's boot camp. And I was in there mostly with some people from Chicago. Yeah, it was a culture shock from them Chicago birds. I'm not going to say what they said, but I mean, 3 out of 4 words was a cuss word.
Do you have any interesting stories that you remember from basic training?
Well, I remember where there was 5,000 recruits in each camp, and 120 in each company, and 2 companies to a barracks, upstairs and downstairs. And our company, one of them Chicago birds lost his gloves. So you all had to be dressed the same. So we're out there and it's about 10 above, we can't wear gloves. Just one guy don't have gloves. And we're out there just like freezing to death with no gloves on our hands, you know, standing at attention, and take them an hour or 2 to inspect everyone standing out there. That was not good.
Anything else?
They had what they call fire watches, and you walk around the barracks at night, and one guy outside and one guy inside. Mm-hmm. In case it's fire, you know, you holler to get everyone out.
Oh, okay.
And I'm outside in the rain one night, and this place, they built a barracks, but they didn't have the roads and everything. It was just a big pile of mud, really.
Mm-hmm.
And this person comes walking, it's about 2 o'clock in the morning, he's walking down the street, and you're supposed to call her, halt, halt, who goes there? And I didn't know who it was, so I'm hauling, halt, halt, and the rain's pouring down on me, and it didn't stop. So I picked up a big hunk of mud and threw it at him. It was a duty officer. Oh, man. But he kind of chewed me out a little bit, and I said, well, I was told to do something, someone's coming down the street. And he said, well, he shouldn't have thrown mud at me. But then he went inside where it was nice and warm and found the fire watch inside to sleep. So I never had to go outside anymore. They let me stay in. I was inside all the time. That other bird, he was stayed outside all the time.
Did you have a specific military occupational specialty while you were in the service?
Yes, I was a enlisted man. I was a quartermaster, which has to do with navigation and working on the bridge and everything.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And steering the ship and working with the navigator and rules of the road and everything like that. And then when I was an officer, I was I could do any job but being an engineer. I was a deck officer, so I was like what they call a first lieutenant on a ship, and an exec on a ship, and the boats. And when I was a warrant officer, that was that was about it, really.
Okay. And did you see any? Was there a zone that you saw combat in?
Oh yeah. Oh yes.
Any specific? Was it Europe or Japan?
No, it was all in the Pacific.
It was in the Pacific?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I was at Saipan, and I was at Tinian, and I was in the Plow Islands, and I was at the Lady Gulf. And we hunted submarines down on the equator on this little Jeep carrier I was on.
If you could have picked a theater to serve in, Europe or Pacific, which one would you have picked?
I wouldn't have had the slightest idea. I was just a kid.
During the war, do you think that one theater was more important than the other?
And no, I don't think so. Although the war was over in the Atlantic before it was in the Pacific. But in the Pacific, see, finally when the Navy got organized and everything, they'd go around and they had bypassed a lot of these islands the Japanese was on, and the Japanese couldn't get supplies or anything, mm-hmm. So they just kind of wither on the vine. There was no use going in there and trying to capture the island because they weren't doing anything anyway. Mm-hmm. They were just existing.
Did you conjure hatred of the Germans or Japanese, or did it come naturally, or did you not have any hatred for them?
I was raised with Japanese on the West Coast. No, I didn't have no hatred for them, except let's kill them little yellow devils. But I didn't, you know. Good Lord, no, I went to school with them and everything. And of course, when the war came along, they went and they gathered up all the Japanese on the West Coast and they
put them in concentration camps.
Well, they didn't call them concentration camps, but that's what they were.
Mm-hmm.
It was a concentration camp.
Mm-hmm. Do you think the war in the Pacific was a racist war on both sides, or just one?
I wouldn't know what a racist would have been. Bit me in the head, you know. I never even heard the term until, 15, 20 years ago or something.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell us anything about combat experiences? You know, where did you see any action? What's kind of vivid to you to this day?
Oh yes. Well, we were out to Saipan. We had a big air raid by the Japanese planes. We didn't know ships. Just the planes flew over, and they were trying to bomb us and strafe us and things like that. And of course, our planes were up fighting them too. And it's a big mess, is all it is, you know. Fortunately, the ship I was on, we didn't get hit, but the one right behind us got hit with a couple of bombs.
And you were in a carrier group?
Yeah, this was what they call escort carriers, the small carriers. And but we came through that one all right. But now when we were out to Lady Gulf, the Japanese fleet got us, this carrier group I was in, and we were getting from the biggest warship in the world was shooting shells through us. The only thing is, see, the Japanese didn't have radar. So when they shot a shell, they made the shell, they put what they call dye on it. They dye mark it. So they shoot you with a shell, and they look and they see the splash, where the splash goes up. And say it was green, they'd see that, and they'd say, oh, we overshot them for a couple hundred yards, so they'd crank their fire control down some. And so they figured they'd hit their target. The trouble is, this big Japanese battleship that was shooting at us, they weren't missing, but the shells, they were using armor piercing, and these little Jeep carriers were more or less built on a cargo hull. They weren't missing us. The shells were going all the way through us before they were exploding. And they'd see the dark, and so the dye mark, so they'd crank it down. Now they're hitting over here on the other side of us. And so they crank it back up, and they're coming through us. But they didn't realize that, although it did tear the ship up a lot. And then we got kamikaze. We had 3 kamikaze planes hit the ship, and we had a bunch of fires on it, but 2 carriers right ahead of us had the kamikaze planes go down their after elevator. And beside the after elevators where they had the torpedoes in racks, they just blew them everywhere, just out, up, everything.
Wow.
Do you remember what ships these were?
I think it was the Gambier Bay and the St. Lo, but I don't remember the names of them.
Which ship are you on?
I was on the Glennon Bay, CV-68, and the task force, I think, was Taffy 3, I think we were. It was composed of 6 Jeep carriers and, I don't know, 6 or 7 destroyers and destroyer escorts. And in that battle, the destroyers or destroyer escorts was a Hull, Johnson, and a Robert, Hoyle, H-O-E-L, Johnson, and a Roberts. And those 3 got sunk because they made torpedo runs on those Japanese battleships. But they got blasted.
Besides what the combat experience you've described before, can you tell us about maybe the most dangerous experiences you've seen in combat?
Well, that's about it, I guess. You know, especially when we were getting shelled by the Japanese task force, and then the suicide planes started bouncing off the ships and whatnot. We had one come right down like it was going to land and bounce off the flight deck, and away you go. And then we had 2 come across ways like this and just hit some 20mm guns on the side and go over the side and killed a few people in the gun tub. So, but we were real lucky on that.
Do you feel that your superior officers were trustworthy, knowledgeable, and inspiring?
Oh yes. In fact, the skipper and the skipper made admiral, and the exec made admiral, and the next skipper made admiral too. And in fact, one of them used to live only a few blocks from me here in Virginia Beach. He's since dead now.
Did you ever refuse to obey an order?
Yes, one time, and I'll never forget it. One of them, like I was telling you, we had this Battle of Saipan was going on, and on the bridge we had a box about so big, made out of metal, with a curtain on it, and inside the curtain was a red light. And because at night you didn't want to show any, you always had darkened ship, you didn't want to show any lights. So if the messenger would bring up a message for the officer of the deck to read, they'd put it in this box, and then they had like goggles to look down inside. He'd turn on this red light, and then he could read the board. Well, when this big air raid from the Japanese was going on, it was just getting sunset. And this division officer of mine, who I'll never forget, was named Barber, and he was from Oregon. He looked exactly like Mussolini. You don't know who that is, but he looked exactly like him, including the big rolls of fat on the back of his neck. And of course, the officers called him Moose to his name, naturally. But of course, us enlisted, we didn't. We'd call it behind his back. And he says, "Get the night box," and I'm up there with my binoculars, looking at the planes. I'm hollering, "Here comes a plane in," and this. You know, you go by numbers like 12, or it's at 2 o'clock and all that. And I told him to get the goddamn night box himself if he didn't like it. The next morning they put me in. I was not on the bridge anymore for general quarters for a while. Oh, he was mad. But that's the only time, I think, really.
I mean, as a commander, you were probably pretty high up on a boat, would you say?
Oh yeah, I was a department head.
Did you have anyone below you refuse an order from you?
No, I don't think so. I don't think I did.
Okay.
I had a few who were a little obstinate, but you know, you don't threaten them, you just tell them what's going to happen.
Do you think the American public has any misconceptions about World War II, you know, similar to like the Band of Brothers?
What the devil was a Band of Brothers?
It was a TV show or a documentary about basically the war in Europe during World War
Or was
II.
that where they're fighting all through France and
Yeah, exactly.
things like that?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I watched one episode of that and I never watched it anymore. But so I don't know. I don't know.
Okay. How would you sum up the efforts of the Allies in World War II?
Excellent. Well, there was some big goofs, but excellent.
Any specifics?
No, but this is what I read. I think there were some goofs in Europe
Mm-hmm.
on stuff, and not so much in the Pacific, because we were, you know, fighting navies, and although the Japanese had some, like Iwo Jima and Okinawa, God, they fight like something. They fought to the last man almost, especially on Iwo Jima. And down at Tarawa, in the first part of the war, which is a little stinking island, and the Marines and these would be about 20 feet apart. Yeah, shooting at each other, and they couldn't. You know, they had a heck of a time. The Marines did. The Marines, well, they were coming in on their boats, on their landing craft, and they didn't realize where the tide was, and the landing craft grounded way out, and they had to walk ashore, and they got really, really slaughtered, a lot of them. But the battleships had pounded that island for days with their 14-inch guns. This was the older battleships had 14-inch guns on it, and to soften it up, but it didn't soften. They had made their bunkers and everything with these great big coconut logs, and the darn shells just bounce off the coconut logs almost. You know, they were dug in so much. Oh, the Marines finally won, but they took a horrible beating on that, really.
Do you still carry any animosity towards your old adversaries?
No, never did.
And what years did you serve in the Navy?
From 1942 to 1973.
And what did you do after World War II?
I was still in the Navy.
Still in the Navy? Just
I was on the carriers, and I was on the salvage ship, and then amphib ships.
did you serve in any other wars?
No, it was when some flaps down there in the Caribbean that people running up and down the hills every now and then. They'd send us down there, and we'd circle around and be 100 and something there, no air conditioning. We'd sail around a couple of weeks and then come back to the U.S. and then some other would bird would be starting to shoot each other down like in Haiti, and we'd have to roar back down there again, you know. But no, I was not in the I was in the Navy, but I wasn't in the Korean War. And I didn't go to Vietnam. In fact, the ship I thought we just started to go there, and then they turned us around for some reason. We didn't go.
Which aircraft carriers did you serve on?
Well, I served on the Clinton Bay, which is the first one, at CVE 68. And then I was on the Palau, which is a CVE 122. And then I was in a carrier division staff. And so I was on the old Midway, Coral Sea, and Roosevelt, which is a CV. At that time, they called them CVAs, I think, was the 41, 42, and 43. And then I was also rode the Philippine Sea and the Lady a couple. When you're in a Cardiff staff, you go, you know, you're going from carrier to carrier. One goes in the yard, the Admiral isn't going to sit in the yard on the carrier with all that noise, so you go on another carrier. And then the last one, I was the first lieutenant on the Independence, which means you can charge everything, all the deck things, all the boats, painting the outside of the ship, and cleaning all the officers' spaces, not where they live, not inside their rooms, but outside, you know, the passageways, you know, like things like that. And they're doing all for all the refueling and all that, and having the supplies when the supplies come over, and the refueling and everything.
So, out of all the bases that you were stationed at, was there a particular favorite one of yours?
I didn't go to many bases. I was always on ships.
On the ships.
Well, let's see. Actually, right here, the amphib base here, or right here in Norfolk or Virginia Beach. They sent me to Charleston for a couple of years. Terrible. That was, well, Charleston's changed now, but that was like back in 1952. Hell, they were still fighting the Civil War down there in 1952. And then I went to Newport for 2 years, and the first year there, I like to froze to death. I put on my long underwear in September and never took it off till May. God, it was cold. I mean, cold. Horribly cold. I remember when I was a duty officer one night, I was on a destroyer tender up there. And it's snowing like mad, about 2 inches an hour, and the snow's getting deeper and deeper. And the wind's blowing over 70 miles an hour. And I called the captain up and told him what I've done. I've got the engines lit off and the CD tail set, which is when you get ready to get underway, you set what you call a CD tail. And he says, well, look at the anemometer, how much wind you got? And I said, I got 72 miles an hour. He says, well, if it gets up to 75, call me and I'll come in. And I thought, good Lord, there's 3 foot of snow on the ground, the plows aren't out, he'll never get here. It never did get up to 75, it only got up to 74. But that night, a bunch of destroyers up at Melville, which is a few miles up the bay, broke loose and drifted around. They had to send tugs up there to keep them from going out in the bay and whatnot. And they found out that was the highest ranking officer in all that list of destroyers up there was a junior officer, a JG or lieutenant. And well, that changed right after that night. I mean, oh, there was a big flap on that because the ships got banged up a little, beating on each other, you know. But Newport was horrible. It isn't now, I understand. I understand they've torn all the old raunchy places downtown, and they got beautiful condos down there and everything now, they tell me.
So, since you actually did spend most of your time on ships, was there a favorite one out of all of them, or were they all kind of the same?
I really liked the Raleigh, which was an amphibious ship. And That was an LSD one. That was a new model. And I really liked the Independence, which was a CV-62, which is one of the huge carriers. Those two ships I really liked. They were great. I was exec on a salvage ship. I spent half the time either up in the Arctic or down in Bermuda, and the Arctic is, it's not bad in the summertime, except they have a little, once in a while you have a little storm up there and you roll like 40, 50 degrees. But once you get in the ice, you don't, you know, you chug around in the ice a little bit.
Do you ever get seasick?
Oh God. First time I went to sea, I was so sick. I think 95% of the crew had never been to sea. And we put this Jeep carrier in commission in Astoria, Oregon. And you gotta go, have you ever seen any of the pictures on the TV about the Coast Guard out there, and they go over the bar on the Columbia River? And that's where they got these, the Coast Guard's got these boats that can turn complete, or campsite, go on over and come back, you know. Oh, it's rough, it gets rougher, very, very rough in a storm. And we sailed out of that, and man, sick. We were going from there up to Seattle to have some load ammunition or some darn thing. Sick. Man, I had my head in the bucket all the way up there, except when the other people's heads weren't in the bucket. Everyone is sick.
Eventually, you got your sea legs though.
Oh yeah, it only took. We went out of Seattle and Bremerton up there and back out to sea, and I was seasick a little teeny bit, and then that was it. I didn't get sick anymore. No more.
All right. Well, thank you.
Is that it?
Yeah.
Okay.